Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Trevor Lawrence got the bag. Did the Jaguars make the right decision? Also, Aaron Rodgers is at it again. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
Joe Burrow no longer alone at the top as the highest paid quarterback, highest paid player in the NFL. The Jaguars have signed Trevor Lawrence to a 5-year extension worth $275 million. Lawrence, $200 guarantees in the deal, $142 fully guaranteed at signing. Tony Wiggins from Locked On Jaguars joins me now. Tony, I always feel like I have to do the Dr. Evil when there's numbers that high. Yeah, what do you make of this deal for a player who, let's be honest, at least from a production standpoint, has not produced like the top quarterbacks in the league?
Yeah, so that production thing can be qualified or quantified a little bit. It depends what you mean and where his feet are. You know, he's never been really at ground zero at first year. He wasn't there. So he was digging his team out of a hole. So you might not have seen as much of his head and his shoulders as you did with other people because of where his feet were. But over the last couple of years, the biggest thing with Trevor is he's got to stay healthy. And all of that ain't his fault, man, especially when I think he had some of the worst interior line play, specifically the center, that we've seen in a long time. So the thing about him, man, is he hasn't broken. And not only hasn't broken, there are very few times when the Jaguars don't play well that you point to Trevor Lawrence and say it was his fault the last 2 years. But they put a lot on him, and for the most part, it's just his turn, Peter. This is the way it works. The highest paid doesn't necessarily mean the best. What it means is it was your turn, you were up, and the team had to make a decision.
You also, with a contract, you pay for future production, not past production. And so I think it's reasonable. A team uses the number one overall pick on a prospect that a lot of us thought was a generational or borderline generational. That word always gets thrown around a little too much, right? But we thought that the upside here was pretty high. If Jaguars receivers just catch the ball in the end zone, Trevor Lawrence has like 10 more touchdowns last year, and maybe we're not having this conversation. Is there something you think structurally, institutionally, they can do to make him look better so that he can produce at the level that his talent, at least the perceived talent level, says that he can?
Sure. And I think they started doing that mainly this year. They started a little bit last year. The problem with the Jaguars, man, is they went to the playoffs. They were riding on a high. They even got past the first round and won a first round game and played a really competitive divisional game in Kansas City. And then they decided that they were going to develop the guys that they already had, and they went to sleep at the wheel. They had the same record in the regular season last year as they did the year before. It came down to the same scenario, a game against the Titans to see if they were going to make the playoffs, and it didn't happen. Had it happened, had they played better in that last game, the defense been able to play better, guess what happens? Trevor Lawrence is a guy that goes to the playoffs in 2 consecutive seasons, and then they look up and everybody's narrative changes. It's funny how that one little thing can change the entire way people view Trevor Lawrence, but if there's something that he needs to change, it's protecting the football. And you notice I didn't say interceptions because even though he's thrown some, he's fumbled more. He has 60 turnovers since he's been in the league. He leads the league in all players in turning the ball over. He has to understand that cannot happen. And usually when it happens, he's trying to make something out of nothing, and he's trying to extend plays. They have to structure it to the point where he just has to play quarterback, kind of like Peyton Manning. We always talk about how Peyton was so great, but the structure around Peyton was always great too, and he didn't have to be Superman with his legs. He just was having to run the offense and make plays with his mind and with his arm.
One of the big trickle-down effects of these sorts of deals is other players can get squeezed out. Do the Jaguars have issues, players coming down the line who they might have to either lowball or struggle to pay because of Trevor Lawrence making $55 million a year?
No, because when you look at the Jaguars, some of their best players are guys that they just signed this year. And the other ones, Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, they picked up his 5th-year option. He's a running back. They can ride that out for a couple of more seasons. Josh Allen just got paid. Yep. The next one is, and Foye Oluwakan got paid, who led the league in tackles over the last 3 years. The next one is Trayvon Walker, and he's going into his third year. Tyson Campbell is in the same situation as a corner that Trevor is as a quarterback. And that is, you see the talent, but you're kind of still waiting. You haven't quite seen it. Well, you ain't going to have time to make that decision because guess what? He's going to be a free agent at the end of this year. So it's another thing that has to be an internal evaluation, a scouting situation. I think that deal also gets done, even though cornerback is very valuable, but quarterback is a whole different animal.
Stay up to date all year on the Jacksonville Jaguars by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Jaguars on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Coming up, do the Jets have an Aaron Rodgers problem? Before we get to that, the Falcons are losing a draft pick. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. You may not have to worry about that much longer. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip off. The good thing is it's not just the NBA Finals. The killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee on all sorts of tickets. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the game, even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the free app and new users get $20 off your first purchase with code Locked On. Terms apply. That's code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed. If you're catching up on this episode of Locked On Sports Today after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. The Atlanta Falcons were busted for tampering. They lost a 5th-round pick in the 2025 draft and fined $250,000. You've likely heard the Falcons were suspected of what the league deemed improper contact with quarterback Kirk Cousins, but they were also fined for the same infraction with wide receiver Darnell Mooney and tight end Charlie Warner. On top of that, the NFL fined Falcons general manager Terry Fontenot $50,000. Of course, the NFL's investigation didn't take too much detective work, considering Cousins basically told on the Falcons in his introductory press conference. JJ Redick will formally interview for the LA Lakers coaching job this weekend, according to a report. As our Locked On Lakers hosts point out, this seems to be taking quite a while to find a coach.
This is why you needed to pull out every single stop, because beyond having to go to your second choice, maybe third choice, whatever, you've been burning time.
Right. And that's the thing. It's like, I get, Andy, why, like, and there was some reporting on Tuesday noting that, like, some of the guys the Lakers want to talk to, Sam Cassell, for example, are still busy. And I get that. But,
Charles
David
Lee
Adelman
got hired.
Right.
Been doing all this.
David Adelman is around. I think the Lakers, said hello, but they haven't gone far down the road.
Chris Quinn has not been busy for a long time. Mike Nori has not been busy for a long time.
These guys are available, and maybe they're not interested, but they have had time.
Who is?
Over on the diamond, the Cubs were leading until the 7th, then the Rays took over and got the win. This loss sets up particularly heavy on our Locked On Cubs host.
Obviously, the Cubs had 3 hits this evening. But for me, right, I just, and maybe it's a personal thing for me because I do hold this position. This is important to me to try and get things right and to try and be fair to people. And so I really lean towards, I thought we were getting the guy that was going to win these type of games. And I understand all of it, right? First of all, the offense wasn't good enough. Tonight, I did not expect a big offensive night. I know Bradley's ERA was inflated, but if you really dig deep, it was one bad start. He's against very good competition. He's a pretty good pitcher with pretty nasty stuff. I thought if the Cubs were going to win, it was probably going to be a tight one, a low-scoring one. It was shaping up to be that. And I understand that Craig Counsell doesn't have any good options in the pen. I thought, and this is where I was wrong, I just thought he was going to figure some stuff out and get the best out of these guys. And everybody in this uniform continues to regress.
The Detroit Tigers avoided being swept by the Washington Nationals.
So if you were like me, you're watching this game and not all too eventful at the beginning portion of the contest. 1-1. Tigers take a 2-1 lead in the home half of the sixth off of Justin Henry big fly, and I do mean big fly. It got out of there in a hurry, which was great to see because Justin Henry Malloy had an opportunity with a couple of men on. I think it was the bases loaded earlier in the game and had a bad strikeout. So he bounces back, big fly, second of the year, first at Comerica Park, got out of there in a hurry, landed well up the left field bleachers, one of the further home runs that you will see, and just shows the pop in the bat.
Aaron Rodgers not at mandatory minicamp for the New York Jets. And because he's Aaron Rodgers, because it's the New York Jets, a lot of people have thoughts on this. Let's see if our pal John Butchko from Locked On Jets has some thoughts on this one. John, Rodgers taking some liberties with the word mandatory in this one. What was your reaction to finding out that after coming to OTAs, he had what is reported a trip, an event that will cause him to miss mandatory camp?
First of all, a couple of years ago, he's in camp in Green Bay, and that was the season he won the MVP. I'm a skeptic on how these offseason practices really are. I mean, just from having spoken with in the past, I've heard players have generally still told me that, if you're a young developing guy, the extra reps can help you, but for the more established trends, they aren't that important. But mainly when a player skips mandatory minicamp, the thing that concerns me is if it's a sign the player is unhappy with the team, either because he doesn't have the contract he wants, because he wants a trade. And I don't get the sense that if that's the case with Rodgers. I mean, Rodgers not a guy who's shy about telling us when he's happy he's playing for. He's never really expressed that. The guy I'm more worried about Hassan Reddick. Hassan Reddick skipped mandatory minicamp because he wants a new contract. Yeah, that's a whole other story. I mean, we could probably spend 5 segments on that. The Jets trading for a guy and then not figuring out the contract situation before that. So that's the one. I know Rodgers is going to generate more headlines because he's Aaron Rodgers. I'm actually more worried about Hassan Reddick. I mean, Rodgers is going to be back week 1, and look, I don't know if we'll see how good he is this year. I mean, I think that there are some questions about how well he'll recover from the Achilles injury, but I don't know if he doesn't play well this year. I don't think it's going to have anything to do with him skipping this mini camp.
Look, as someone who covered Aaron Rodgers for a long time, who've watched Aaron Rodgers for even longer than that, it's not about how much he's going to miss or how much he's going to hurt his game by not being in mandatory minicamp. To me, it's more about the message. Last year, he seemed to be all in. He went to all the stuff he was supposed to be at. This year, he did some of the optional stuff and then decided, the mandatory stuff, I've got stuff that's more important to me. And as someone who watched the final couple of years in Green Bay, when he seemed to have a stranglehold on the organization, my concern would come in and say, okay, who's really in charge in New York? Who's really calling the shots? And I felt like Robert Saleh saying, well, this is an unexcused absence, was a little bit of a sort of like Aaron Rodgers microaggression to just be like, just remember, we're still in charge here. And if this is how this is all starting out and what is going to be a pivotal year in New York, I don't know. To me, that doesn't seem like it's the best way to get this thing going. Especially for a guy who said, if it's not about winning, get that out of the building. And yet he's not here.
Well, I think he said that the day before he started his celebrity feud with Jimmy Kimmel. But look, Robert Saleh is not in charge. This is, I think, to your point, I mean, I said this on Locked On Jets. Aaron Rodgers is doing this because he can, because he's in charge of the organization. The Jets have made it clear that Aaron Rodgers, the coach, has no authority over Aaron Rodgers. I mean, I said this, typically when you have a Hall of Fame level quarterback, they are more powerful than the coach and they are more powerful than the front office. It's usually not as explicit as the Jets have made it. The Jets have made it clear that Aaron Rodgers is the guy. Aaron Rodgers is in charge. But so from that standpoint, I get your point, but to me, that's not new information because the Jets have been telling us the last year plus that Aaron Rodgers is in charge. And yeah, he skipped it because he could. And I mean, I think your points are well founded. Just for me, it's just kind of stuff we already knew already. We knew Aaron Rodgers was the most important guy in this organization. We knew he's got the direct line to the owner. We know that, the head coach, let's be honest, the head coach is only here because Aaron Rodgers is here. If Aaron Rodgers wasn't still around, the Jets probably would have fired Roberts after his performance last year. The ability to say, we don't want to blow things up because we have Aaron Rodgers coming back, that's probably the only reason Robert Saleh is still here. So you're right. It probably was a microaggression. Look, I think the Jets are not thrilled with the fact Rodgers skipped this. I mean, they could have easily excused it if they were okay with it. they gave him this little slap on the wrist fine. I think it was something like a little over $30,000, which for guys making $7.5 million is, maybe calling it a slap on the wrist fine is overstating it. But, I think your point is fair that, Aaron Rodgers is showing you he's in charge. But for me, that's just not new information because it's been the status quo the last year plus.
Stay up to date on the New York Jets by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Jets on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Finally, air traffic controllers at the Edmonton airport were trying to help out the Oilers any way they could. One jokingly told the pilot of the plane carrying the Panthers that the runway had a 2-hour hold or whatever it would take to divert your flight to another airport. Anything to get the Oilers back in the series. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode of Locked On Sports Today. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Lost, we are here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, will the Mavericks survive for one more game, or will we be talking about another Boston title? So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
For more episodes of Locked On Sports Today, go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.